Welcome to this week's Torah portion called Chukat, meaning the ordinance of. The Torah portion can be found in Numbers 19, chapter 19, verses 1 through chapter 22 and verse 1. The Haftorah is found in Judges, chapter 11, 1 through 33. The reading of the Psalms is found in Psalm 100 and 101. And the New Testament portion can be found in John chapter 3, verses 10 through 21. Let's get started, shall we? So why is this Torah portion called an ordinance of? What was there an ordinance of that Yah had to create this? Well, when we look in chapter 19 and verse 1, Yah gives laws for purification. In verse 19 of chapter 19, it says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, This is the statute of the law that the Lord has commanded. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a red heifer without defect, without spot or blemish, in which there is no blemish, and which a yoke has never come. And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be taken outside the camp and slaughtered before him. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. And the heifer shall be burned in his sight, its skin, its flesh, and its blood with its dung shall be burned. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet yarn and throw them into the fire, burning the heifer. Then the priest shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp, but the priest shall be unclean until the evening." Now, just taking a look at this very first part of this Torah portion, you have a red heifer, very specific, that basically was sacrificed on behalf of the people. Why do we say that? It's because that's exactly what the red heifer is for. It's innocent, never had worked a day in his life, never had a yoke upon it. It is without spot or blemish, meaning it's sinless. These things sound familiar so far. The red heifer, of course, is a sign and symbol of Yeshua, who came spotless and unblemished, who had never been burdened with the yoke of sin, even though he was tempted of all things, yet he remained sinless. So this was him. This is a type and shadow of Yah. Something that we should always look at. I also wanted to look at chapter 20, because this is dealing with the death of Miriam. So now you have the death of the red heifer, who's been burned outside the camp. And then you have a personal, something that's close to the congregation, as well as Moses and Aaron, because this was a blood relation. And the people of 20 in verse 1 says, "And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates. There is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock and said to them, Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. Notice here in this particular chapter, here we have Moses and Aaron grieving the loss of their sister. Moses especially so because it was his sister who took him who watched over him while he was in the water as a child when his mother put him in the basket made of reeds, and was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who then took Moses, adopted him, gave him the name Moses, because she drew him out of the water. And here comes Miriam, who says, This is a Hebrew child. Shall I get one of the Hebrew women to nurse him for you? So Moses was taken care of and grown up in his formative years with his mother, his sister, and his brother. They were a family, so he knew who he was, even though he was raised in the palace along with Pharaoh. So, dealing with those strong emotions, the argument that the people who gathered themselves together, the whole congregation of Israel, gathered themselves against Moses and Aaron, and they said they argued with them, stating these things. They forgot quickly how Yah had brought them out of Egypt and took care of them. They knew they were brought out, but they said, Moses, you did this to us. You brought us out. We were better there, where there was certain death and certain sin that was there for them. But yet Yah is the one who brought them out of Egypt and promised that they would be his people and he would be their God. They forgot about that part. Moses, on his part, still grieving the loss of a loved one, and who prayed before the Lord and should have just followed the instructions of the Lord. But I'm sure he came out to grumbling and hearing the murmuring and still arguing with him, even after what the scripture said, that the Spirit of the Lord, the glory of the Lord came down. So it should have been obvious to the people that the Lord had spoken to him, and yet they were probably not in awe, but just waiting for Moses to come out. Here Moses, in his own anger and his own emotional feelings, came out and struck the rock, it says twice. And there are some circles who say he struck the rock twice because the first strike, out came blood, and then the second strike, out then came water again. This is what the scriptures say. Yeshua is that rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So it could be a type and shadow again of Yeshua, of him being pierced after the crucifixion, and how, again, out came blood, then came water, signifying that he had died on the cross. So here Moses and Aaron are here, I guess you could call it, between a rock and a hard place, because now they have to deal with the people. They're not able to grieve as one would grieve, but they still had to push their feelings aside and take care of God's people. How many of us have been there where we have to push our feelings aside just to do what thus saith the Lord? It does happen, and he allows us space, yes, definitely, but he still wants to provide for his people, even when we look at ourselves and the people, how many of us have murmured and complained about situations? I can talk about myself, murmuring and complaining about things that happened to me even this week, but yet I still have to go back and remind myself that Yah is good. Lord, you are good. You've been better than good. So I have to go back and always constantly remind myself of that, because I could have been separated. I could have been deaf. I could have been dead in my sins, and yet God. And this is what Israel had to remember. They should have remembered that they could have been dead in slavery, could have been dead in the world, could have been dead to sin. And Yah never would have brought them out to call them his people. And this moves into the Haftorah portion in Judges 11. It's a story of Jephthah, who was rejected by his brothers, who his mother was not a reputable woman, and he was raised in his father's house. But when his father passed, his father had died, and his brothers cast him out, and yet Jephthah became a warrior of sorts, and his brothers, the whole town the whole congregation had to come to Jephthah and said, "Fight for us." Jephthah had to set aside his feelings in a bit and state that if I fight on your behalf, then I should be head over you. I should be judge over you. He just wasn't saying it out of a self-righteousness. He was speaking because he knew the word of the Lord. The only way you could become a judge is if you are able to judge righteously in Torah. Here, Jephthah had to set aside his own feelings and assist the people. Again, this is where we have to learn. You can be between a rock and a hard place. You can have strong feelings, but we can't allow those feelings to control us. We have to remember that it is the Lord who is our help. It is the Lord who has always been there for us. It is the Lord who fights with us, fights for us. He fights on our behalf. We have to remember that he has been our advocate from the beginning, and he continues to show us every day with each sacrifice, each spilling of blood, each time that we have to separate ourselves as we fast until it is time to come back into the congregation again. Each time that we are in need of something, where we say ourselves and our household are in need, and it feels like Yah is not listening, and yet he's working on our behalf. He is always working on our best behalf. Everything he does and everything that he says is for our good. We always have to remember that. We're never, ever caught between a rock and a hard place, so to speak, because the rock can crush us. The hard place can squash us. But if that rock is Christ, then he gives us life. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Yah bless. Until we see you again.